Hello everyone, my name is Ranjini Venkatakrishnan and you are joining me in this terrible lighting from an edit bay on the 6th floor of the Cronkite School building to let me teach you how to use Adobe After Effects to create some basic graphics for the Cronkite newscast. I'm using the zoom camera so you guys can see me, meet me. Just a quick introduction about myself. My name is Ranjini Venkatakrishnan and I am going to be graduating grad student at Cronkite, and I did my undergrad here as well. I finished my undergrad in 2020 and I received the Outstanding Graduate Award, and then I stayed back for another year to finish my master's degree. And so this is my grad project that I am doing in the spring semester of 2021. Before we do anything in this tutorial, what you need to do is open Playout. So that is on your desktop right here. Double click that, open Playout, because when you are publishing your graphics later on, this is what needs to be open for them all to go through. So just open that and then you can close it, just so that Playout is just gonna chill here on the desktop. And the other thing you need to do is open up the graphics request form. So the graphics request form is where the producers will put in all the graphics requests for each day. So these are the graphics that will be going into the newscast either that day or like sometimes they're graphics requested for like a future show, but this is where the graphics requests are. So what you need to do is pick one. So for example, there is this one on film bar saved, and so over here in this column B, you see the story slug, and you need to know that later for when you're publishing the graphic. In column C, you see the name of the producer who put that request in there, so that when you're working on the graphics, if you have any questions, this is your point of contact. And then over here in column F, we see whether it's a monitor animation or a CKEY. A monitor animation is what goes behind the anchors in those monitors. Or if it's a CKEY, like this one, it's basically what goes on the green screen. Knowing whether the graphic you're making is a monitor animation or a CKEY animation is important because that's what tells you how you need to position the text in this graphic. And we'll talk about that in a moment. This is the text that the producer wants to appear on the graphic, and then a short description of what they're looking for. Usually the producers are pretty good about giving us at least a sentence or two about what they want in the graphic. So for example, in this one, the producer wants, ideally, she wants like, a picture from the actual film bar that the story is about, but if we can't find that, we can just get a picture of any old movie screen in the theater. Once you select your graphic, obviously, so previously this would have been white. So if you reset that, previously it would have been like this. Once you select your graphic, you want to go in there and highlight that row in yellow so that the other people in the TV graphics lab and the producers know that someone is working on this. Next, what you'll need to do is go to Google. And this is most of the time, Google is where you will go to find some basic backgrounds for your graphics that you are creating. So I'm just going to Google movie theater screen, hop onto images, tools. This is very important. This is probably the most important step when picking the background for your graphics. What you need to do is go into tools, usage rights, and hit Creative Commons licenses. Because basically, like all of these are images that we are allowed to use for the newscast. If you don't use something with a Creative Commons license, there's a possibility that you could get in trouble for it. And the other thing you need to do is go to size and hit large because we want the best quality. And sometimes even if you select large up here, some of these images are going to be horrible quality. They're going to be pretty small, like for example this image right here. So what you're going to do when you find an image you like, you're going to right click on that, hit open image in new tab, and this is where you'll know, like this is obviously tiny. This is not going to work for the newscast because it's going to be like really terrible quality. So we don't want that image. What we are going to use instead is this one. So again, right click, open image in new tab. You see it's a pretty nice big image. Right click again, save image as, and you're gonna save it to your desktop as it is. So that's gonna download and it'll pop up right here. There we go. Now what you're gonna do is open up After Effects. Now in After Effects, you're gonna drag that image into the sidebar, and then what you're gonna do, so there are two ways to create a new composition in After Effects. One is to create the new composition button right here, or a new composition from footage if you have like a video in here. The other way is to straight up take this JPEG and drag it here. And there you go, a new composition was created just like that. Now, here is where I teach you some of the different things that you will use when you're dealing with graphics in Adobe After Effects. So if you hit this little arrow button next to this layer, so this is a layer in After Effects, and if you hit this layer and hit transform, you see all of these different options. Now the ones you will be working with most often are obviously position and scale. And sometimes, depending on the graphic, rotation. So what you want to do is, let's say I want to, make this image a little more zoomed in. So you would go to scale and you would do this. And then let's say, this is scaling right into the middle there. I don't want to see the middle. I want it moved up a little bit. So you go into position and one of these two. So you would usually, that one pans left to right. And you don't want to do that, so Command Z. And then the other one, obviously, is the one that goes up and down. So you want to pan up like that, like so. Another cool way to access the scale and rotation and position, whichever one you want to access, is close all of this. You click on the layer, and you just hit, let's say you want to scale. You just hit S on your keyboard, and scale will pop up. Let's say you want to change a position. You just want position. You don't want the whole menu on there. You just hit P, and position will show up. Same thing. If you hit R, you get rotation. Right now, I want to go back to scale, and let's say I want to start it. Hold on. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna fix the position as well. So I'm gonna hit Shift. I'm going to hold down Shift and press P so that both position and scale are open, but only these two. You don't want the whole menu. So this is what I'm doing. Now I'm going to bring this back here. There we go. Let's say I wanted to start like this, zoomed out, and then I want to slowly zoom in. So what you would want to do in that situation is start wherever you want. Let's say I want to start at the 1 second mark. I would hit this button over here that kind of looks like a timer. You hit that and you see this diamond over here? That's a keyframe. And this keyframe is important because basically that's what determines when things happen in After Effects. So you would want to, drop that keyframe there, and let's say you wanted to slowly zoom in over the next 20 seconds. Okay? What you would do is you would drag your, thing over to the 20-second mark, and you would zoom in. Okay? And you can tell, as you can see, like as soon as I started moving the thing here, a new keyframe popped up here. So how this is gonna look is like this. It's very slow, but subtle. And when you're creating graphics for the newscast, you don't want it to be sudden zoom-ins. But what you can also do is, let's say this is a bit too slow for my taste and you want to move that keyframe up a little shorter. You don't have to delete this and create a new one. What you can do is click that and then just drag it to where you want. Let's say I want to leave it at the 12-second mark. So now it's going to be like this. Actually, if you notice, sometimes it'll be slow, and that's because this green thing shows that it's rendering. So if it's black like this, it's not rendered yet, but green means it's rendered. So if I go back, it's way faster now. That's one thing, but another problem, like I mentioned before, is it's zooming in right into the center. So the way you can change this is to go back to position, and just like over here, you like it the way this is, so you drop a keyframe over there, and then you go to the last frame and you adjust the picture as you want it. So I want it a little panned up, and now when you zoom out, it's gonna zoom in like this. So that's how you use keyframes in Adobe After Effects. Now, let's say you want to add text now. If you go back to the graphic request form, we'll see that the text we need to add is film bar saved. That's the text we need to add here, film bar saved. So what you want to do is, you see this T up here, you want to take that and click that and click where you want and type in film bar saved. Now, obviously you can't see it right now because it's white text, so what you want to do is highlight the whole thing, and the character drop down menu here is where you can fiddle around with the text. So let's say I want to make it black and I want to make it bigger. Notice, to make things bigger, you can do it two ways. You can sort of hover over it and then drag it left or right, depending on what you want. You can also click into it and type in the specific size number that you want. You can also use this drop-down menu, but it only goes down up to 72, and like, that's too small for us. I prefer to actually drag it like this because it's just easier to see in real time how big you want it. What I also want to do is do this so that it's on two lines, and then I'm gonna highlight the whole thing, go down into paragraph, and center a line so that it's nice and lined up. Go back into character, and I want to make it bigger, even bigger, right? Now, one thing you need to know about text placement is, if it's a monitor animation, it would be in the middle. But if it's a CKEY means the anchor would be standing either to the left or the right. And the anchor takes up basically like this whole space. So let's say I'm going to use a shape layer to show you. Let's say, you know, this would be the anchor. So what you want to do is make sure there is space for the anchor to stand. So this is what a CKEY animation would look like. Assume this red shape layer here is the anchor, okay? And I'll teach you more about shape layers in just a minute. For now, we're going to get rid of that because it's ugly. So what we're going to do is click back into the text layer, move it as you please. This one is a CKEY, so I'm actually going to keep the text here, but what I'm going to do is, for the position of the text, I'm going to move it a little bit to the left. But if you move the image to the left, the text doesn't move, and then you have to reposition that. So one thing you can do is Command Z, and then go over here, and you see this swirly thing? This swirly thing is called a pick whip. What you want to do is the swirly thing, the pick whip in the text layer, you want to take that, drag it to the base layer. So what you've done now is you have parented the text layer to this bottom layer. So anything that you do for the bottom layer, if you move it, if you rescale it, the text will automatically change with it. So watch what happens now. If I move it to the left, the text layer moves too. So that's very convenient. So what I'm imagining is that the anchor would stand about here. So I'm assuming this is what would happen. That way, when the anchor stands about here, they won't block the text. Does that make sense? So yeah, and you've seen me do the shape layer about twice now, but I'm going to show you another cool thing. Let's say I want it to just, show up behind the text like this. I would drag that shape layer down under the text, and then I would edit it so that it fits. So that's how you create a shape layer. But right now I don't want to use a shape layer, let's say, and also you can change the color of the shape layer by looking at the fill thing, and you can, make it whatever color you want, maybe blue, maybe red or pink or something. But yeah, but right now I don't want the shape layer, so I'm just gonna get rid of that. I don't want this other shape layer either. But instead of a shape layer, what I do want to use is a drop shadow on the text. So what you want to do is go into Effects and Presets and just start typing in drop, and it's right here. So when I drag that onto the text, and what happens is, so you'll notice immediately that an effect layer opens up on the left. I'm gonna make that bigger so you guys can see. What you immediately want to do is take the distance down to 0 and increase the softness. Okay, you can put it at whatever you want. Look closely at the text for the next 5 seconds. This is when I increase the opacity of the shadow. So when I decrease the opacity of the shadow. This is when I increase the softness. This is when I decrease the softness. So there's a lot you can do with it. And let's say this is still not enough. You can, enough of a shadow to make the text stand out, you can just single click on the drop shadow layer, and then on your keyboard hit Command D. And the shadow layer basically doubles. And so you get this. You can also change the color of the drop shadow. So you can make one white and one black. You can make one red and one white. You can make it, both of them white, and it would look like this. I personally like to experiment with this depending on the graphic that I'm creating, just to give it a little subtle pizzazz. But that's how you use a drop shadow. What other thing I want to do is put a Gaussian blur on the theater background. Now this image is obviously very grainy looking, but just, to show you, let's say, just for sake of showing you guys, I'm just gonna scale that up just to show you guys how the Gaussian blur works. So this is the thing. Obviously, if you're going to put text over this, even if it's like this or here, it's obviously still not as visible. So what you can do in these situations is go into effects and just start typing Gaussian, so Gaussian blur, and it'll pop up almost immediately, and then just drag that over the image. And then when you go to that image, it'll be an effect, Gaussian blur, and basically you can increase the blurriness of the image so the text stands out more. You can go back into the text, make this background white, and there we go. Look at how nicely it stands out. You can also increase the blur on the background there. Let's say I want to make it 15, let's say, so it stands out even more. So what I actually like to do is start with it being not blurry at all. So I would start it off at 0, put in a keyframe, and then after the 1 second mark, it would start to blur as the text appears. So over the next 2 seconds, it would slowly blur to about 11% is good here. So what happens is you get something that looks like this. See? You notice that it blurred, but you hardly realized. What would happen then is at this point, you would want to introduce the text. The text, you would want it to start appearing at this point. And you would go into effects, go into animation presets, text, animate in, and you would pick any of these. Typically the producers don't like any kind of crazy effects on the text, so usually the smooth move in is good. Sometimes they just prefer the classic fade in. You could also just do this. So you'll notice that as the text appeared, the background blurred. And again, you can reposition it, rescale it, however you want. Now, one last thing I want to show you guys is how to use video in Adobe After Effects, because sometimes graphics are more interesting when the background is not a still image but rather a video. For example, whenever we're doing stories about the border wall or the border crisis or migrants or that kind of thing, we usually use a very nice video pan of the border wall that we found online. But I don't have that with me right now, so what we're going to use instead is this video of a baby cow. So what I'm going to do is just drag that in here and drop it in. It's going to import. Graphics always need to be at least 30 seconds. So you'll notice that this video stops around the 18-second mark. So obviously you're going to rescale it first, right? However you want. And what you're going to do is you're going to go all the way towards the end of that, right click, hit time, and freeze on last frame. So what happens is basically it reaches this point and then it just freezes there all the way till the 30-second mark. You can also layer videos on top of other videos. So for example, this is one about bats. And what I can do is scale that up, and then I can reduce the opacity. So what happens now is you'll see bats over the cow. So there are different ways to play around with this, obviously. And another thing you can do is, say, take an image. Let's put in Trump. Just because what you can do is, and this is just to show you, so I'm not going to bother getting a Creative Commons image just for this. Using the pen tool. So sometimes what you want to do is take this pen tool up here And then you can start making little things to basically outline Donald Trump on this. And now what you can do, that's how you use a pen tool, and then you can just move this onto this. So what you can do is then at some point you can have Donald Trump basically animate. And so what you can do here is for the position, basically you want, let's say at the 2-second point, you want Trump to come in and be like here. And you go back to the 1 second mark and you move him out of the frame. And when you do this, you have him slide in like that. So that is how you do some basic stuff in After Effects when you're creating graphics. Now you need to publish the graphics. Before that, you need to export the graphic and get approval from the producer. So I'm going to show you in Slack. So to export the graphic, you would need to go into File, hit Export, and then Add to Media Encoder Queue, and it will pop up over here. What you're going to do is, instead of Match Source High Bitrate, you're going to click on that arrow and go all the way down and select YouTube 1080p Full HD, and you're going to rename it. So click on that layer. You're going to want to rename it and make sure it saves to desktop. Then you hit play, and when you do, it will export and it will show up here on the desktop. What you then do is go into Slack, and just for an example, I'll show you. One of the previous graphics that I made was here, this one. And I had gotten approval from the producer about it, but then I made some changes and I got approval again. This was one. And they usually give you some feedback, and if you do need to change something, you would need to make those changes before you publish it. To publish a graphic, you want to open Premiere Pro, and you want to create a new sequence and make sure you select the Cronkite News preset, and that's how you create a new sequence. Then you want to drag in the graphic that you want to publish, and you would drag it onto the timeline in that new sequence. Make sure you hit Keep Existing Settings, and then you would just make sure it's all right, and then go all the way to the end of it. Hit O on your keyboard so that you select the whole thing and save it. Then you open Windows to go to Extensions and hit Story Cut. So when you open Story Cut, expand the window a little bit, and you want to select the rundown for that day. For example, this rundown was for April 15, 2021, and then under the Select Story thing, you want to find the story that you created the graphic for. This is why you need to remember the slug. So you want to look for the one with a placeholder in it. Usually here where it says, Plus Media, there would have been a placeholder there, and then you would just hit Publish. And then it would just export in Media Encoder. And yes, usually 2 files will export in Media Encoder. But if Playout is not already open, it will not export properly. And that is how you publish the graphics. That's it for this Adobe After Effects tutorial. Thank you all so much for following along, and I hope you learned something, and I hope this makes it easier for you when you're just starting out using Adobe After Effects. Have a great rest of your semester. I'm Ranjini Venkatakrishnan.